Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to Senator Ludwig, representing both the Minister for Indigenous Health and the Minister for Mental Health. My question relates to the government's response to the tragic incidents of youth suicide in Indigenous communities. This has recently been highlighted by the Northern Territory inquiry into youth suicide. Unfortunately, this problem is not a new phenomenon. In June 2010, the Senate committee report The Hidden Toll: Suicide in Australia acknowledged these issues, and in September 2011 the government appointed a new advisory group to develop a specific suicide prevention strategy for Indigenous communities. I'm asking about the progress of the work of the new Indigenous Suicide Prevention Advisory Group, and in particular, when will the specific Indigenous suicide prevention strategy be publicly available? What is the proposed timeline for the rollout of that strategy, and how will it be funded?
The Minister representing the Minister for Mental Health and Ageing and the Minister for Indigenous Health, Senator Ludwig.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Wright for her question. And of course, both Minister Butler, Snowden and Plibersek have all been working cooperatively and continuously on this issue. I am aware of the continuing media, but can I say, just as a point of reflection, and remain, this government, and I'm sure all in this chamber, remain concerned about the reported high rates of suicide amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. And any person taking their own life is a tragedy, and that deeply affects their family and their community. That's why this government did set up that advisory committee. Suicide prevention remains a priority for this government. That's why in September 2011 we announced the establishment of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention Advisory Group to inform on the development of Australia's first national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide prevention strategy. The development of the strategy will involve, no doubt, extensive consultation with communities across Australia, including the Northern Territory and areas of remote Queensland. We understand that the Select Committee on Youth Suicide in the Northern Territory will be reporting soon, and the government will carefully consider the outcomes of this inquiry. The government does continue to work closely with state and territory governments to ensure that responses are well coordinated. The government recently did redouble its efforts in suicide prevention, including $6 million being allocated to tackle Indigenous suicide as part of the broader $222.6 million, I should say, that's $22.6 million community-led suicide prevention activity funding. And of course, this does come on top of—
Time's expired, Senator Ludwig. Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr President. I do note that, unfortunately, the Minister didn't provide answers to when the strategy will be available, the proposed timeline for the rollout, or indeed how it is to be funded. And if it's not possible for him to give those answers now, I'd ask that they be taken on notice. But I'm also interested in knowing, as a supplementary, has the government undertaken any systematic evaluations of suicide prevention efforts in Indigenous communities, and has it implemented any specific programs that identify and address suicide clusters in Indigenous communities, particularly in relation to youth suicide? If so, what's the scope and funding of those programs?
The Minister.
Mr President, I thank Senator Wright. It is in part quite a detailed, multi-part question, but if I can work through some of the detail, part of it I will indicate that I will take on notice to see if I can provide more information from the responsible minister. But in terms of some of the specific issues, if I could go to the funding provided to 13 Indigenous specific community-based projects, including the Yeraman project in the Kimberley region in WA and the Train the Trainer Suicide Story project in the Central Desert area of the Northern Territory. All of these add to the assistance provided and underpinning some of the work that both the state and territory and Commonwealth government do in this region. Access to allied psychological service programs receives a $206 million increase in the 2011 budget over 5 years, including which was $36.5 million for Indigenous specific mental health services.
Time's expired, Senator Ludwig. Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr President. A further supplementary, and I thank the Minister for being prepared to take my question on notice. Is the government funding or supporting any suicide prevention strategies that are initiated by or based on consultation with specific Indigenous communities and which draw on the traditional knowledge and wisdom of elders? And furthermore, are these initiatives, if any, implemented through locally controlled partnerships?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank Senator Wright. It is a very specific question, but could I just put it in this context? The department has contributed, this is just one program, but I think it highlights in part the issue, $175,330 to Queensland Health to fund a specific prevention officer as part of a regional suicide prevention strategy for the Mount Isa Health Services District that includes Doomadgee, Mount Isa, Mornington Island and Dajara. This whole-of-government strategy is aimed at developing local capacity and focuses on prevention, awareness and early education. The Standby Bereavement Response Team are also working with the Doomadgee community at the request of the community members. And as part of the rollout of the National Partnership Agreement on Remote Indigenous Housing, the Australian and Queensland governments are committed to supporting employment opportunities for local Indigenous people. And I think that just gives a short but a brief overview of some of the more specific on the ground